Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And welcome back as we continue with our readings of the 12 babs of the first muqaddimah of Ibn Juzayy alayhi rahmatullah in his Tasheel li Ulum al-Tanzil. So there are some things which are recurring ideas or things that we touched on earlier that we return to. And to some extent, we have touched on aspects of the history of tafsir, the development of tafsir, some of the mufassirin who are particularly important, especially to Ibn Juzayy as an Andalusian Maliki scholar, those whom he draws from the West and the East, as he will put it in this chapter. So we're returning to some of these things and reiterating some of the key ideas, as well as benefiting from the new points. So here, في ذكر المفسرين,
اعلم أن السلف الصالح انقسموا على فرقتين، فمنهم من فسر القرآن وتكلم في معانيه وهم الأكثرون، ومنهم من توقف عن الكلام فيه احتياطا لما ورد من التشديد في ذلك. فقد قالت عائشة رضي الله عنها: ما كان رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يفسر من القرآن إلا آيات بعدد علمه إياهن جبريل. وقال صلى الله عليه وسلم: من قال في القرآن برأيه وأصاب فقد أخطأ. وتأول المفسرون حديث عائشة رضي الله عنها بأنه في مغيبات القرآن التي لا تعلم إلا بتوقيف من الله تعالى، وتأول الحديث الآخر بأنه في من تكلم في القرآن بغير علم ولا أدوات، لا فيه من تكلم بما تقتضيه أدوات العلوم ونظر في أقوال العلماء المتقدمين، فإن هذا لم يقل في القرآن برأيه.
Okay, so this is an important opening, to be honest, to this discussion, and takes us back to some of the discussion or the different things that we can gather from the practice of the Salaf and the statements of the Salaf regarding tafsir. Right, so you have a number of statements that seem to indicate that one should avoid speaking about the Quran. Okay, and the wording of that is whoever says something about the Quran according to his opinion. So the word ra'i is there in circulation with regards to this topic, right? So then later on we have got something in our minds now in the 21st century, and we pick this up from things written in the 20th century, and those go back to things that were said earlier that divide between two types of tafsir, right? So this tafsir bil ma'thur and tafsir bil ra'i. If you know like anything about usul al-tafsir, you probably heard about this division, because of one of the first things that's said in presentations of usul al-tafsir. It's also one of the most problematic categories that is presented in usul al-tafsir. Okay, because the very idea of what tafsir is something which a mufassir draws upon different tools and different aspects and sources, right? So the mufassir will draw from what has been narrated, and we've seen that already in the previous discussions. He will or she will pay attention to hadith of the Prophet ﷺ and statements of the Sahaba, and we're going to see a bit more about that today. That's important. We want to know about that, and the tabi'een and atba' at-tabi'een. So what people were saying has got various levels of authority, yes, but all of it has got its importance in fixing for us what was being understood and explained in the time when people knew most about, what they're talking about, especially things that pertain to the occasions of revelation. There are things that only they will have had direct access to. They were there, right? So context of understanding is something that no one can outdo the Sahaba in that. And then there is also things which were being explained through wahi by the Prophet ﷺ. He was receiving the correct interpretation, authoritative interpretation via Jibreel alayhi salam, and the Sahaba would convey that, and sometimes they would tell us that that's what was happening by making it marfu', and sometimes they might not, but There could still be marfu' hukman. Okay, it could still be in the same, it's understood as being raised to the Prophet ﷺ, right, in terms of its ruling. So that's why the ma'thur means anything which is transmitted and therefore it is received, is important to every mufassir. Okay, and then every mufassir also has to look at the Quran in its own right, and look at the language of the Quran and the wording of it, and understand what that wording entails. And then all these other narrations, all these narrations and so on, after the words of the Quran, you know, are brought to bear to help understand and contextualize the words of the Quran themselves. And then there are also other tools which the mufassir may use, which could be broadly called ra'i, right? Ra'i is where a person is using their brain, right? Beyond just, you know, memorizing something and passing it on. It is where they engage in some kind of, sometimes it's called ijtihad, right? So ra'i and ijtihad are words which are sometimes interchanged in this kind of context. So was it okay for, and is it okay for a mufassir to say something about the Quran according to ra'i? Now, you would understand from some of these early statements here that no, ra'i is madhmoom, itlaqan. All ra'i is condemnable, because من قال في القرآن برأيه وأصاب فقد أخطأ, right? So I would translate this a bit more, you know, give it a bit more flavor in the translation. Whoever speaks about the Quran according to opinion, right, and gets it right, is still wrong. Okay, so even if you're right, you are wrong because of what you did and how you got there. Even if the actual conclusion, the actual statement might be true, but you have not done something, you have not behaved truly and rightly. So from this you can understand, you know, a general warning against ra'i. Okay, but that ra'i, then you have to understand, what did they mean by ra'i? What did they mean by it? And that's where ulama, like Ibn Juzayy here, like Imam Ghazali, and I think I mentioned this before, they limited the meaning of what they intended by dispraising ra'i in this way, by saying it is to speak without the correct knowledge, without the scholarly tools, right? Without the learning and the authority, therefore, to say something about the Quran beyond just transmitting something that you received from an actual authority, right? So even by the way, transmitting something, we cannot exclude that there is an element of ra'i in there, right? Because you still have to decide, okay, what I'm going to quote, the opinion I'm going to quote, the opinion I'm going to take from a book, I've understood this opinion enough to be able to convey it and to explain it, right? And especially if you're speaking in English and you're reading it from a book in Arabic, and then your translation of what they said could itself be garbled. You know, these are things that I've actually observed. Plenty of people who are saying, you know, we do not do tafsir bil ra'i, you know, only bil ma'thur. We go to the salaf, and then they misunderstand the salaf. So what was the point? You know, have you absolved yourselves? You know, wama ubarri'u nafsi. They're doing, they're absolving themselves by saying we're just doing naql, right? Naql of tafsir is not tafsir. This is my contention. To convey tafsir is not actually tafsir. It is conveying tafsir, which is fine, which is what, you know, we need people to do. We need people to compile things and to convey things and to transmit things and to preserve things. Okay, but tafsir is also an ongoing need that will exist in every generation as people continue to have questions about the Quran. There could be new questions due to new issues. There could be new questions due to new misunderstandings and distance of our successive generations from the time of revelation. So there's always going to be things that need to be clarified, not because the Quran itself is in need of clarification, but because we are in need of clarification about things that we are blocked off from the Quran. So the gap is coming from our distance from the words and the context of revelation. So that's how I want us to see tafsir. Tafsir is filling that gap and bringing us back to an understanding of the Quran, which is in itself clear, which is in itself a communication that was effective at the time of revelation, but its effectiveness with us may be less because of our own shortcomings and inability to comprehend that message. That's why Allah Azza wa Jal has never described the Quran as being locked, right? You know, we see all these courses that say, unlocking the Quran. Yeah, I can give you real life examples. I save them when I see them. Unlocking the Quran, or even worse, decoding the Quran as if the Quran was code. But even unlocking, right? Did Allah Azza wa Jal tell you that the Quran was locked, that you need mafatih to open the Quran? Or did he say something about locks, but something else? أَفَلَا يَتَدَبَّرُونَ الْقُرْآنَ أَمْ عَلَى, is it على القرآن? أَمْ عَلَى قُلُوبٍ أَقْفَالُهَا, right? In Surah Muhammad, alayhi salatu wasalam. So, are there locks upon hearts? Okay, so it's the hearts that can be locked from appreciating the Quran, not the Quran that is locked and has to be unlocked. Okay, this is some relevance to what we're reading here, which is the fact that tafsir is needed in order to bring people to those answers. And you can't just rely on things that have been transmitted from before, because how are you going to deal with the new questions? So there's always going to be a need for the ra'i of the mufassir, right? Ra'yun sadid, how is this ra'i going to be accurate and useful and generating truth of interpretation? By having the scholarly tools, right? And learning those scholarly tools from those who went before, having access to all the things that they used as well, seeing how they used them, learning how to use them, and using them in the same way, right? So that's what we call usul of tafsir, right? So not just the narrations of tafsir, but then the usul upon which those narrations are based. And something that I like to say, and you can take this as a soundbite, every ma'thur started life either as wahi or ra'i. Every ma'thur started life as wahi or ra'i. Okay, so anything that we call tafsir ma'thur originally is, you know, something that was revealed to the Prophet ﷺ and then conveyed, or it started off as the opinion of a sahabi or someone else. And that ra'i, again, we give value to that ra'i, we give respect to that ra'i, we place weight on it, because these are people whose ra'i should be given precedence over other ara. But its ra'i is different from wahi. It's not on the same level as that. Okay, so that's the meaning that the ulama then are giving to those early warnings against speaking about the Quran from ra'i. Then later on, you've got this idea that there's something called tafsir bil ma'thur and versus tafsir bil ra'i. Tafsir bil ma'thur is depending on narrations, and tafsir bil ra'i is, you know, what, like, it's not exactly clear what, but thinking about the Quran from a number of different angles, using different tools to interpret it, including language. And it's questionable, really, should language be considered a form of ra'i? Because language, in a sense, is something narrated. It's not really clear where language fits in. That's all I'm trying to say. Because, you know, if the language is something which is how the Quran is conveyed by language, the Quran is conveyed in words, in language, then reading it according to language is not something like you're imposing some external thinking process onto the Quran, right? So it's not really clear that it should be in ra'i. It's not also clear that it should be in ma'thur, although arguably language, you know, the meanings of language are things which also come to us through narrations, although those narrations don't tend to be in the hadith books. For the most part, we find them in the dictionaries, right? So it's a different set of narrations, a different form of developing a corpus of meanings. But then they talked about tafsir bil ra'i, and then you've got this division, which is a much more modern division than you might think, between tafsir bil ra'i al-mahmud wa tafsir bil ra'i al-madhmoom, right? So you find this with Dr. Dhahabi in Tafsir al-Mufassirun, one of our, you know, great Azhari scholars, a very important book that he's written. And in that he talks about this division. But basically, Tafsir bil Ra'i al-Mahmud, they just say, okay, the things that agree with Ahl Sunnah, so Tafsir al-Razi will go in there. and of course there'll be people who don't want to put Tafsir al-Razi there, but okay, we're going to put him there. Mahmud, okay, yeah, you have got a lot of tangents, Imam Razi, but you know what, you're Ahl Sunnah, you are Mahmud, and your tafsir is Mahmud, and your ra'i is Mahmud, okay? But Zamakhshari, tafsir bil ra'i al-madhmoom, you are Mu'tazili, i'tizal is madhmoom, you are madhmoom, and your tafsir is madhmoom, and your ra'i is madhmoom. I mean, you can understand the kind of, the thought process of this categorization, but I don't know if you feel the same way, but I don't find it extremely helpful in understanding the nature of ra'i, okay? Az-Zamakhshari's ra'i was good enough for all our mufassirin from Ahlul Sunnah to take it on board and to run with it. They just obviously disagreed with all his various Mu'tazili sprinklings throughout his work. So they opposed him in certain conclusions and certain methodological points, but like in terms of applying ra'i to the Quran by analyzing its linguistic excellence and its imagery and its bayan, everyone is indebted to Zamakhshari in this regard. This is what has brought the i'jaz of the Quran to the fore and created really a new understanding and whole new avenues of exploring the i'jaz of the Quran. So we can't really just write him off like a ra'i al-madhmoom, even if many things he said are madhmoom. Fine. Okay, let me look at these questions before we move on. I mean, in terms of the historical thing, so you're asking a little bit about where this the precedents and so on, as we can explore it a bit further. Professor Walid Saleh from Toronto has written some very convincing things in this regard, and he shows where Ibn Taymiyyah comes into it, and he shows also where the 20th century Azhari scholars come into it. Starting with Al-Allama al-Zurqani, the author of Manah al-Arifan, and then Dr. Dhahabi in Tafsir al-Mufassirun, and how they categorize things. And that's something that you can also see in my thesis. I charted it. I followed some of Salih's indications, and then I looked at it in terms of Tafsir al-Quran bil-Quran specifically. So what we're getting at here is Ra'i, Ma'thur versus Ra'i is not a hugely helpful categorization. It obscures certain things. Again, why I made a particular attention to this in my thesis, because Tafsir al-Quran bil-Quran, it's very difficult to see again which one should it fit into, right? So there's a lot of authors, a lot of them put Tafsir al-Quran bil-Quran into Tafsir bil-Ma'thur, because they say, well, the Quran is the highest form of Ma'thur, right? It's narrated, and then hadiths are narrated. So doing Tafsir al-Quran through other verses of the Quran is Tafsir bil-Ma'thur. Yeah, but at the same time, making the connection between the ayat and then applying the operations to understand one in light of the other is the work of pure ra'i and ijtihad, right? And people like Dr. Dhahabi actually acknowledged that while sort of conflating it in this way. So the starting point of the problem is this idea that there is ma'thur versus ra'i. It's one of these things like, okay, maybe in some situations it seems a helpful division, but it's certainly not a sacred one, right? Because what it implies is that ra'i is bad and ma'thur is good. And that's what was intended really by those who kind of gave the suggestion for this kind of terminology to develop, namely Ibn Taymiyyah, rahmatullahi alayh, because he wanted to imply that tafsir should be very narration-based and there shouldn't be much going on in terms of ra'i. And then when he's commented on the mufassirin, he's given his support to certain tafsir, like the tafsir of al-Tabari, for those very reasons, because he's called al-Tabari's tafsir, I think, min ajalli al-tafasir al-ma'thura, right? So he didn't say tafsir bil-ma'thur, but he calls it among the best tafasir ma'thura. That's the way that he words it. So he has given a boost to certain tafasir that he sees as fitting the right kind of paradigm, and then others he dispraised, like Zamakhshari, but he did give a positive shout out to Ibn Atiyah, right? So Ibn Atiyah, to be honest, has certain things in common with Zamakhshari, and they are around the same time. But Ibn Taymiyyah is basically saying, well, out of these ones, Ibn Atiyah is the better one, right? So he gives a certain positive word about it. But I don't want to get too much into the historical aspect, but I think this is important just to get the framing right, that we're not getting stuck with this idea of Ma'thur versus Ra'i in Tafsir, right? But we want to see all these various things as tools or parts of the toolkit of the Mufassir. But certainly we have been brought into this discussion by what the Musannif has said here, alayhi rahmatullah, that amongst the Salaf there were those who held back. Okay, first of all, it says those who made commentary on the Quran and spoke on its meanings. So made commentary might be over like an overwording. You might say they commented on the meanings. وَهُمُ الْأَكْثَرُونَ. Now, how would he establish that they're the Aktharun? I'm not sure, but he's telling us that most of the Salaf, he's saying not the Sahaba specifically, but the Salaf, most of the Salaf spoke about the meanings of the Quran. I suppose it's a reasonable statement, because if they were passing on the knowledge of Islam, what would be the most important thing to pass on? It is the Quran. And when you're teaching the Quran, you would talk about the meanings, either because you're explaining it from yourself or people are asking you questions. Of course you would talk about the meanings of the Quran. And it's not always the case that you have on hand an isnad for every single thing that you say. So in a way, you're speaking from yourself. But at the same time, you're speaking not from like an independently generated opinion from nothing, not from hot air, but from your understanding that has been gleaned by your upbringing and your surroundings and your teachers and the context that you're living in, right? So that's why this is, important as a generation or as several generations together. So he says that they're the aktharun who did speak, and then there are those who held back, tawaqqafu ihtiyatan, because of the caution regarding it. And then we have the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alaihi wasallam will not comment on the verse of Quran until they had knowledge of them from Jibreel. So there's a little bit of the wording is not so clear in the translation here. Okay, so they're quoting from Sheikh Tayyar here, and I noticed that myself. I skimmed Sheikh Tayyar's sharh, and he does note that this hadith is not strong, and maybe we've got that in our footnote here. In our version. Yeah, he mentions that some criticism of the hadith. Anyway, so ما كان رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم يفسر من القرآن إلا آيات بعدد علمه إياهن جبريل. So there's something not conveyed here in this translation, which is to say, it is only a small enumerated portion of verses that he would explain, in that Jibreel had explained those to him, had taught them to him. Okay. So this goes against, this, even though it's not a strong hadith, but the point in the hadith goes against the contention that we mentioned earlier, that Ibn Taymiyyah rahmatullah implied that the Prophet ﷺ would explain all of the Quran or most of the Quran to the Sahaba. Just as he was teaching them the Quran, reciting it to them, he was also explaining it to them. So this goes against that. And the waqi' really goes against what he claimed, really. And he said, whoever speaks of the Quran according to his own view and is correct has made a mistake. So someone asked me, so it means he gets it right by coincidence? Yeah, you could say that's one way of looking at it. The commentators interpreted the hadith of Aisha that it was about the unseen matters in the Quran. Yes, which cannot be known but by. Now, endowment from Allah is a kind of strange translation. بِالتَّوْقِيفٍ, by being informed. The other hadith is interpreted to mean that it is about whoever speaks in the Quran without knowledge, without scholarly instruments, not about one who speaks about that which the instruments of the sciences require. So we have this constant problem with the word اقتضاء تقتضيه أدوات العلوم, and looks into the sayings of the earlier scholars. وَالنَّظَرَ فِي أَقْوَالِ الْعُلَمَاءِ الْمُتَقَدِّمِينَ فَإِنَّ هَذَا لَمْ يَقُلْ فِي الْقُرْآنِ بِرَأْيِهِ. And he's not speaking by ra'i according to that dispraised meaning of ra'i. but he's speaking according to Ra'i in a broader sense of Ra'i, right? Okay, I'll make that clearer. Then he mentions the tabaqat. So tabaqat doesn't really mean degrees. What would be a good word for tabaqat? Tabaqat is when you're dealing with biographical literature, and then you have different generations and different ages and eras, right? So you might have a good word for tabaqat, but it doesn't mean that there are different degrees, higher degree, lower degree. That's not really, the basis of the discussion is not that, although he touches on some aspects like that.
واعلم أن المفسرين على طبقات، فالطبقة الأولى الصحابة رضي الله عنهم، وأكثرهم كلاما في التفسير ابن عباس، وكان علي بن أبي طالب رضي الله عنه يثني على تفسير ابن عباس ويقول كأنما ينظر إلى الغيب من ستر رقيق. وقال ابن عباس ما عندي من تفسير القرآن فهو عن علي بن أبي طالب رضي الله عنه، ويتلوهما عبد الله بن مسعود وأبي بن كعب وزيد بن ثابت، ثم عبد الله بن عمر بن الخطاب وعبد الله بن عمرو بن العاص، وكل ما جاء عن الصحابة من التفسير فهو حسن مقبول، والطبقة الثانية التابعون.
Okay. Categories, you're suggesting the word categories for tabaqat? Could be. What do we call tabaqat literature generally? Biographical literature, I think we say. Stages, eras, periods. Periods might be the way to do it in tabaqat here. So the first one is the Sahaba. Okay. So as he notes, the one who has most narrations, at least in Tafsir, is Ibn Abbas, and then he's grouping with him Ali radiallahu anhu. Okay, so we have. Okay, so Muhammad's suggestion of generations. Yeah, generations could be, I think, a good word here. I think that will work well. Okay, I'm not going to change it all just now, but just I'll put that for reference. So then, Barakallah Fik, Muhammad. So he's sort of grouping Ali radiallahu anhu with Ibn Abbas, and he's telling us that Ibn Abbas also would say that he is taking from Ali, right? And it is certainly the case that Ibn Abbas, because he was so young, he did gather knowledge from the other Sahaba. Of course, Ali radiallahu anhu was young as well. I'm not sure what the age difference is between them, but Ibn Abbas is coming a bit down the line. Okay, so they followed them. I had a feeling this was going to go wrong. So when he says وَيَتْلُوهُمَا, he doesn't mean they're followed like as if after them. He means that in terms of fadl and seniority in tafsir, the next level amongst them. So this is where degrees actually sort of becomes useful. So there follows them in degree Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, Ubay ibn Ka'b, Zayd ibn Thabit. So he's putting them in one level. Then he's saying then. So I changed that to then, okay, because it has to be then Abdullah ibn Umar and Abdullah ibn Amr. Okay. So that's an interesting categorization, but at least it's fairly familiar, the names that he's mentioning. Everything that has been reported of the companions' commentary is accepted and is good. So this is this is a statement which has to be taken with a little bit of care for a couple of reasons. I kind of indicated to you the sense in which this is true and important, that we recognize the significance of the generation of the Sahaba and their tafsir. But we have to appreciate also that there is a lot of tafsil in this, and not least when there are different opinions amongst the Sahaba, right? So it would not be possible when there are conflicting statements between Ibn Abbas and Ibn Mas'ud concerning a particular ayah, for us to say, well, we take both, if they're contradictory in some way, the two opinions. We can't take them both and say they're both Hasan Maqbul. Some tarjih is going to be needed, right? So a lot of times there is ikhtilaf between them, between the Sahaba. So in that case, other things are needed in order to do tarjih. If there is ijma' of the Sahaba, then of course we've got a much more, a much weightier case, okay? And then it depends what kind of thing it is. But there's more detail. There's more detail. I want to add one more thing as well, which is that there's the kind of slogan that comes about in the modern times, which is understanding the Quran and the Sunnah, or rather following the Quran and the Sunnah according to the understanding of the Sahaba. Okay, we should have enough humility to know that we do not have direct access to the Fahm al-Sahaba. Okay, we don't have direct access. We can get there through narrations, right? That can give us a certain amount of grasp of Fahm al-Sahaba, right? But even like with another person, like I'm qalilul fahm in reality, okay? But I understand things a certain way, rightly and wrongly, okay? You cannot understand what I understand and how I understand except through things that I happen to say out loud and having discussion with me, asking me questions. You can probe my understanding. If you don't have access to probe my understanding, then you just have to go with some recordings, and then you'll hear me say something in one place and you might glean something from that understanding. Other people could say, no, that's not actually what he meant, because I understand him better, right? I've been listening. I listened to all of the 45 videos from module 1, right? So I understand better what he meant, because there's other things that you missed, okay? So we should have some humility when dealing with the Sahaba, that a narration from a Sahabi is a tool and a means to get to their fahm, but we will never be able to have fahm al-Sahaba. And to kid ourselves that we are going to follow Quran and Sunnah by fahm al-Sahaba, in my personal view, is actually on the level of being offensive, to them and to our own uqul, right? To suppose that we could actually achieve this in reality, right? As to aiming for it, sure, we're in the same boat here. Fadl Abbas is a scholar that I respect. Yes, he passed away recently. Criticizes this idea too, that the Sahaba were solely reliant on authority for their commentary on the Quran. Yeah, and so we also respect the Ra'i as well, right? So in a way, the paradigm that we, of this idea that we must, pay attention first and foremost and even exclusively to the statements of the Sahaba, is kind of premised on the idea that they had been receiving the explanation of every ayah from the Prophet ﷺ. So then there is little to no independent thought in their tafsir. As for the extent of independent thought in their tafsir, I think there's a lot of, let's say, PhD theses and so many things that could still be investigated on that, if interesting methodology could be designed for it. But our point here is that we by getting narrations in tafsir, we are getting access to what they actually happen to say out loud, and we're getting access to what happened to get written down and transmitted and got recorded in books. Okay, what about the things that they just understood and what was really obvious to everyone? Because think in terms of common sense. What is really obvious doesn't need to be said. The only time you say something is if it's not obvious or some issue arose or somebody questioned it, right? So sometimes people say, like, okay, is there any narration that tells us, like, I'm just going to pick a sort of random example because let's say it was an example I was looking at recently, or some debate on the meaning of the word sikeen, right? Is there any narration that tells us that sikeen means knife, right? Well, if it's obvious enough, then we don't need a narration to tell us the meaning of the word, right? The reason this came up actually was because there's a narration in which Abu Huraira was reported to have said that there was a conversation happening, the word sikeen was mentioned, and then he said, and that was the first time I knew that it was called a sikeen, because we only call it mudya. If I remember correctly, the word is mudya, right? So what that implies is two things. Number one, Abu Huraira was not familiar with the word sikeen, maybe because they didn't use it in his dialect. It's from the Daws, maybe they don't use the word sikeen, they use the word mudya only. Number two, it tells us that the word does mean knife, because that's him explicitly saying, that was when I found out and realized that it means this, that it means the same as mudya, right? Anyway, it's just an example that came to my mind as we go past. But things that are obvious did not need to be talked about out loud, and therefore we don't get the narrations of what's obvious. We only get narrations of what came up as a question. That's a very important methodological point. Therefore, you will never have access to Fahm al-Sahaba as a comprehensive thing, as a holistic thing. You only get the things that got talked about. Why did they get talked about? Because some people misunderstood it. As for the things that they all understood, you will never see them in narrations. This is my contention. What are your thoughts on those who say ijma' is only ijma' of Sahaba? It's an usul al-fiqh question, you know, or unless you're asking in specifically in tafsir, but you know, it's not the mainstream of the ulama who say the only ijma' is ijma' of Sahaba. Other questions about how ijma' is, you know, identified, and I touched on the issue of ijma' and tafsir when I was talking I had another lecture about evolution, which I can point you to, and I talked about the idea of Fahm al-Sahaba as well there, because the idea was sometimes the Mufassirin might have just all agreed on something because a decent statement was made by someone early on, and then it was fine. So the Mufassirin just went with it and they copied it and they said the same thing. And there was no and sort of case closed, right? There's no need to reopen that case until maybe sometime down the line, something happens or some new information arrives. Could be in the field of science. Okay, I'm not talking specifically about evolution now, but say in general scientific things present a question. Oh, hold on. Does it make sense that we understand the Quran in this way? And then you say, okay, hold on a second. No, all the Mufassirin seem to have said this. But you can ask, why did they say that? Right? Were they basing that on some wahi, or was it ra'i? Was it someone's ra'i that just got taken and then repeated? And then are we going to call that ijma'? Right? When we look at cumulative tradition, ijma' might not be the word for it. You can just say there was a kind of case closed, but the case can be reopened if there was reason to reopen it. That's a sort of general principle, or the way I would look at it. Just because people didn't have a reason to investigate it, or you know, they didn't independently. Not all the Mufassirin have independently investigated every issue. That's the fact of the matter. If they're just repeating what people said and passing it on, I wouldn't call, you know, if A passed it to B and B passed it to C and C passed it to D and D passed it to E and so on, I wouldn't say that that's ijma' of A, B, C, D, and E. I would say it's the opinion of A, and then others accepted it and passed it on. Not that there's ijma' between them. Ijma' implies that each of them has an independent reason to say it, and they are agreed on that matter. Okay, that's the way I look at it, at least in the field of tafsir. You can feel free to disagree in other domains. Trying to get me into trouble, Zafar. Okay, the second degree is that of the followers.
وأحسنهم كلاما في التفسير الحسن بن أبي الحسن البصري وسعيد بن جبير ومجاهد مولى بن عباس وعلقمة صاحب عبد الله بن مسعود ويتلوهم عكرمة وقتادة والسدي والضحاك بن مزاحم وأبو صالح وأبو العالية ثم.
Okay, so again, following them in degree of authority. and I'm not sure how much this plays out, but of course you talk about senior tabi'een and junior tabi'een, and that can be to do with their age, right? It can be to do, therefore how much they were able to be, with the Sahaba and learning from them. Now, these should probably all have biographies, given, because there was a practice in the earlier part of this that people were given bios, and then this is not being given here. And these are some important names which need some contextualization or just some awareness of them. Okay. Okay. As-Suddi, Tahak. Right. Then later, upright people.
قال تفسير القرآن عدول كل خلف وألف الناس فيه كالمفضل وعبد الرزاق وعبد بن حميد والبخاري وعلي بن أبي طلحة وغيرهم. ثم إن محمد بن جرير الطبري جمع أقوال المفسرين وأحسن النظر فيها. وممن صنف في التفسير أيضا أبو بكر النقاش والثعلبي والماوردي، إلا أن كلامهم يحتاج إلى تنقيح وقد استدرك الناس على بعضهم. وصنف أبو محمد بن قتيبة في غريب القرآن ومشكله وكثير من علومه. وصنف في معاني القرآن جماعة من النحويين كأبي إسحاق الزجاج وأبي علي الفارسي وأبي جعفر النحاس.
Okay. Not Zujaj, but Zajjaj. There's some issues with regards to, like, when you transcribe people's names, do you keep the al or not? And there's different standards in that regard. As you see here, he's written Abu Bakr an-Naqash. Okay, so they're using the Tajweed version, if you like, rather than just the standard al. So then I would have to make this Az-Zajjaj and An-Nahas, okay? But you can't leave it off then, okay? But then certain other names, if it's a first name, you're more likely to keep the al. As-Suddi, so when it's not in a full name, if it's just mentioning it by itself, you can leave off the al, like in let's say Mawardi, Tha'labi, that would be fine according to that standard. But then Suddi, or when it's more like a laqab, then you may need to keep I think Suddi we can take it off, but in the first name Dahak, we'd have to say Ad-Dahak. So yeah, this is all issues of, a standard that you have to follow, right? You're questioning, can we use rank or ranking? Yeah, you can use the word rank instead of degree, that's okay. Right, so then he mentions a number of the Mufassirin, and amongst them he mentions At-Tabari. And he mentions At-Tabari did what? جمع أقوال المفسرين وأحسن النظر فيها. So I wouldn't say perfected the study of them. I don't think that translates it well. But he investigated them or researched them thoroughly and effectively and well. Okay, studied them well. Let's say perfected. I mean, as a term of praise, that's fine, but it just sort of doesn't quite get across in English what he did. Right.
وأما أهل المغرب والأندلس فصنف القاضي منذر بن سعيد البلوطي كتابا في غريب القرآن وتفسيره. ثم
So before we get into the Andalus, just to mention, he mentioned a few names as well. Ibn Qutayba is an important author. Much of his science is on the unusual word of the Quran and its problematic. So he's got books in the Mushkil al-Quran. As we said, Mushkil, I don't want to use the word problematic. So, في غريب القرآن. unusual words. I'm okay with the idea of calling it unusual words, but you know, Gharib al-Quran, in this kind of context, you just say the vocabulary of the Quran, right? Because they call Gharib al-Quran. ومشكله وكثير من علومه. So I don't know why he said much of its science is on compiled works on the unusual words. Let's go with this. On its problematic passages. Let's go with that for now. And many of its sciences. Let's say of its other sciences, right? Obscure for mushkil. Obscure is okay. I think for mushkil before, what I said was difficult. Because again, like what I was saying before, you'd want to reflect that the difficulty is coming from our own shortcoming. Now, in a way, you could argue that difficult is the same as problematic, right? But I just think problematic gives much more of a sense that there's a problem with the passage, in the passage. Whereas difficult is just like, well, I find it difficult, right? Obscure maybe for gharib. Well, Azhar could tell me what he meant, but I, for gharib, have sometimes used uncommon. So that's in my Itqan translation, I call them uncommon words. Polysemic is wujuh al-nadha'ir. Wujuh al-nadha'ir. Right, so Jama'a min al-Humayr. So then you've got these grammarians, Zajjaj, Al-Farisi, and Nahas. Al-Farisi, I'm not aware what his book in Ma'an al-Quran is. I assume that there is something that maybe is not with us now, but he's got works in Nahu itself, and he's got works in Qira'at, Tawjih al-Qira'at. Zajjaj and Nahas are two of the very important names in what's called Ma'an al-Quran. Ma'an al-Quran is linguistic, mostly just linguistic commentary on the Quran. And it's sort of overlooked a lot of the time within the history of tafsir. I mean, because it's sort of seen as not falling in the genre of tafsir as such, people just see it as a kind of side genre. But you could really just consider those as tafasir that don't necessarily cover every ayah of the Quran, and they don't necessarily cover every angle, but all tafsirs select which angles of the Quran they are talking about. But these kind of works, and Zajjaj in particular, became important resources for people like Imam al-Tabari in his tafsir. And al-Tabari often says, قَالَ أَهْلُ الْمَعَانِي قَالَ أَهْلُ الْمَعَانِي. When he's saying that, he's referring to the likes of Zajjaj. I think he used his work and they were around the same time. But certainly people of this type who were writing grammatical studies of the Quran, but according, verse by verse. So very close to what became tafsir proper, as a more developed genre. Okay, right.
المقرئ أبو محمد مكي بن أبي طالب كتاب الهداية في تفسير القرآن، وكتابا في غريب القرآن، وكتابا في ناسخ القرآن ومنسوخه، وكتابا في إعراب القرآن، إلى غير ذلك من تواليفه، فإنها نحو 80 تأليفا، أكثرها في علوم القرآن من القراءات والتفسير وغير ذلك. وأما أبو عمرو الداني فتواليفه تليف على 120، إلا أن أكثرها في القراءات، ولم يؤلف في التفسير إلا قليلا. وأما أبو العباس المهدوي فمتقن التآليف، حسن الترتيب، جامع لفنون علوم القرآن.
Okay, so we've got here a number of the a'lam of Al-Andalus and the Maghrib in general. So he mentions Mundhir bin Saeed al-Balluti. So we follow the Dabt in our edition, then it will be al-Balluti. Compiled a book on the unusual words. Again, these terms, we're going to want to and their commentary. So not their commentary. Its commentary at the Quran. So that's because they're using the word commentary for tafsir. So كتابا في غريب القرآن وتفسير القرآن. Okay. I assume, because I don't think that he's going to mean كتابا في غريب القرآن وتفسير غريب القرآن, because otherwise you just say كتابا في تفسير غريب القرآن, which to be honest you don't need. It would be redundant because that's what كتاب في غريب القرآن is. It's تفسير غريب القرآن. So I'm sure he means غريب and tafsir more generally. Then the teacher of, okay, then he mentions Makki ibn Abi Talib, a hugely prolific author. He's got the tafsir called Al-Hidayah, and he's got numerous other books pertaining to Ulum al-Quran, which are hugely important in the history of Ulum al-Quran. And then he comes to Abu Amr al-Dani. Al-Dani means he's from Denia in Spain. His writings are more than 120, most of them on the Quran, yet he only wrote a little on tafsir as such. And then Abu al-Abbas al-Mahdawi, فَمُتْقِنٌ, I will not use the word perfectionist, because perfectionist just gives you this impression about, you know, he was obsessed with perfection. It just means that he wrote with he was highly skilled and proficient in his writings. In beautiful arrangement. In fact, it's like his ta'alif are mutqina or mutqana, right? So فَمُتْقِنُ التَّأَلِيف حَسَنُ التَّرْتِيب جَامِعٌ لِفُنُونِ عُلُومِ القرآن. So these are descriptions of his ta'alif, really, or at least the things that come after are descriptions of his ta'alif. So he was highly skilled in his works, which are arranged beautifully and in gathering, and which gather, you know, we just need to look at the whole sentence then and decide how it's worded, okay? The different sorts of the sciences of the Quran. Well, the different sorts of the sciences, you can just say the various sciences of the Quran. Okay, then he mentions the two qadis.
وجاء القاضيان أبو بكر بن العربي وأبو محمد عبد الحق بن عطية، فأبدع كل واحد منهما وأجمل واحتفل وأكمل. فأما ابن العربي فصنف كتاب أنوار الفجر في غاية الاحتفال والجمع لعلوم القرآن.
Okay, let's see. In beautiful arrangement, in terms of Hasan al-Tartib. Yeah, Hasan al-Tartib is not, I mean, yes, Hasan is beautiful as well, but Hasan al-Tartib, I think you could certainly get away with beautiful arrangement, but I would indeed have written, as I was suggesting, well structured. So there, I've edited it more than I would have generally, okay? So the two qadis, Ibn Arabi compiled Anwar al-Fajr.
ما تلف تلافاه بكتاب قانون التأويل إلا أنه اخترمته المنية قبل تخليصه وتلخيصه.
Okay. Now I'm not sure exactly the meaning of talafahu, but it doesn't make too much sense that it would mean corrected. It does sound like he's saying that his book, The Lights of Dawn, was lost, was destroyed. I don't know the story of it. Maybe somebody knows. But then he would have then replaced it with something. I don't know why we would say here corrected it with. We can look up. Don't judge me that I'm going to maybe type in. Okay, let's leave that till another time. I have some problems with this keyboard. So when it was destroyed, so he followed it up with, in one way or another, Qanun al-Ta'wil. Now the footnote is useful here because I have seen a book by Ibn Arabi called Qanun al-Ta'wil, and I remember looking through it in the bookshop, Dar es Salaam in Cairo next to the Azhar, and looking through it and just sort of like, where's the Qanun? I want Qanun, you know, very attracted to the idea of Qanun al-Ta'wil, but what I'm seeing is very scattered thoughts. So I think that's the volume he's referring to here. There is a book which is not intended in this discussion, which is جامع لفوائد شتى من عدة علوم, okay, and not just Tafsir and Quran in one volume, so that is published. But then there's another one which is قانون التأويل في التفسير, which may have other titles according to various researchers. Some said it should be واضح السبيل إلى معرفة قانون التأويل بفوائد التنزيل. Okay, so that's what Ibn Juzayy is referring to when he says he followed up with Qanun al-Ta'wil, except that he died before. Oh no! Okay, unfortunate here. Desire destroyed it before its purification and summarization. This is the kind of thing that I would like counsel you, right? This is what I'm saying, like, as a translator, once you've written something down, look at it and just ask, have I written something that makes sense, you know? So in this case here, why would desire destroy? Like, what does the translator think has happened here? Right, so Ibn al-Arabi was writing and then just desire from shaitan overtook him, or he just desired to travel and he just abandoned, right? What does it mean? Desire destroyed it. So اخترمته المنية means that death, you know, came to him and interrupted his endeavors. Okay, al-maniyya is death, caught up with him. Yes. Let's see. Caught up with him. Even that's a bit like, it's maybe sticking too closely to the sort of literary way of saying اخترمته المنية. We might end up making it dry in the translation, saying except that he died or he passed away. To be honest, I probably will do that because I don't sort of see the need to exoticize it in a way that doesn't work well in English idiom. Before its purification and summarization, died prematurely. Yeah, except it brings up other questions, you know. Everyone dies in their time and stuff like that. So قبل تخليصه وتلخيصه, purification and summarization. Okay, I mean, I guess that kind of so it implies that he'd written it in a way that still contains some sort of rough edges, and that another process. Although takhlis could just mean completion, yeah. Because, you know, we say, I don't know, my teacher in Qira'ah was khalis, you know, get on with it, finish off your portion for today, right? So takhlisihi wa talkhisihi does mean summarization. So it's like, it still seems to imply that he would have been expected to apply a process of sort of editing and improvement. But I don't think that takhlis is purification here. I think takhlis is completion before completing and editing it. Because talkhis, of course, does imply summarizing, but it's not that an author is expected to summarize the work. But what you are supposed to do is look through and just chop out any unnecessary words that you know, things that have spilled over, and just you want to make it as clear ibara as possible from your first round. Inqadh. Why are you saying the word inqadh to me? Help me out here. Wa'allafa. Do you need help? Okay, so just hit the hit, you know, just type help and we will call 911 for you. Okay, so وألف في سائر علوم القرآن أي كلمة تخليص تعني إنقاذ. Okay. Okay. So Antara should not need any help. You're a warrior. Come on. أي كلمة تخليص تعني إنقاذ. Let's have a look. Right, let me see if this is going to work because yes. Okay, so I'm not scared of Arabic letters, but I have trouble with this keyboard getting them to work. All right, so let's look in Lane's lexicon for takhlis, right? This is the site that I tend to use for Lane's lexicon. There are other ways to look it up. خلصه, render it clear or pure. So you could say clarification, okay. But it's more clear in the sense of taking out shawa'ib, right? From honey or something. Refinement, that's quite nice. Separate from another thing. Saved, secured, or freed him. But I just don't think that applies here to the tafsir, that he was saving it from something. From death, you know, maybe. Made it clear, explained or expounded or interpreted it. As also لخصه. No, that's interesting. So if it can be used as a kind of synonym of لخص, well, purify was the word that we started with, so that's what I'm problematizing. نعم أنه يقصد مات فجأة قبل إنهاء الكتاب. We got this. We're talking about the next bit قبل تخليصه وتلخيصه. So we're just trying to get the exactness of what he intends. Obviously he means before he completed it, yes. لخصه can mean, خلصه can mean لخصه, explained or expounded or interpreted. So in that case, this could be an example of where I've said to you that when someone uses a sort of flowery synonyms in Arabic, you're not bound to translate each of them independently. It's only if the two of them are intended independently that you have to translate them independently. Otherwise, you can make the choice of just keeping it simpler in English because we're not trying to reproduce a flowery Arabic style if it doesn't fit with the English style that you're going for, right? So if we said قبل تخليصي وتلخيصي, we could see that as he's just being fancy, right? He doesn't really mean two things by تخليص and تلخيص. He really just means one thing, which amounts to completion, or could be along the lines of editing it or perfecting it, okay, before perfecting it. So the question would be, did he complete the full mushaf in the sort of rough form, in which case we'd understand his statement in that light, or did he get to a certain surah and then he was not able to complete it? That would tell us another meaning. So based on just the words, it's maybe not possible to decide between these. Completing it will do the job, okay. Before reviewing it, again, it could be that, again, if we found out that he did complete it but didn't complete the process of working on it, then reviewing it might be a good word. Okay, so he composed many useful works on the rest of the sciences of the Quran. That's fine. Then Ibn Atiyah.
ألف في سائر علوم القرآن تواليف مفيدة. وأما ابن عطية فكتابه في التفسير أحسن التواليف وأعدلها، فإنه اطلع على تواليف من كان قبله فهذبها ولخصها، وهو مع ذلك حسن العبارة مسدد النظر محافظ على السنة.
Okay, so very high praise here for Ibn Atiyah, and not surprisingly, Ibn Atiyah is one of the key sources for Ibn Juzayy in his tafsir. His book and commentary is the best of the compositions, the most balanced of them, for he studied the works of whoever had preceded him and trimmed them and summarized them. That could work, but I don't know, it sounds a bit funny in English. Trimmed them and summarized them. Along with that, he has a wonderful mode of expression. All right, that's fine. Whose view this is not grammatical? along with that, he has a wonderful mode of expression whose view doesn't make sense. So obviously this needs to be revised. His views of sure and good judgment. So you don't need his view, you know, he had sure and good judgment. Sure and good judgment. Good judgment is fine, or right judgment. And guarded the prophetic way. محافظ على السنة. That's not too bad. Should it be had here, or were they contemporaries? Oh no, Ibn Atiyah is before him. Ibn Atiyah is before. Then the science of Quran was sealed in the Andalus.
ثم ختم علماء القرآن بالأندلس.
So the reason Ismat is saying good judgment. I've said right judgment because Musaddad is not just good. Musaddad means that he's actually put on the right track. So that God has guided him in a way to have the right judgment and to get it right. And not just good judgment. It's close, in closer meaning. It's not bad translation to good judgment. Yeah. So there's issues with the sentences. You have to bear in mind that I'm not editing as an editor now. I'm checking the translation. So there are things which, you know, in terms of sentence structure, which need to be dealt with at a subsequent stage. Yeah, when I'm not being recorded.
سائر المغرب بشيخنا الأستاذ أبي جعفر بن الزبير، فلقد قطع عمره في خدمة القرآن، وآتاه الله بسطة في علمه وقوة في فهمه، وله فيه تحقيق ونظر دقيق.
Now, not the science of Quran was sealed, but the scholars, ulama al-Quran bil-Andalus. So they're not that were sealed in the Andalus, because that implies that no other ulama of Quran appeared anywhere else. But he's talking about the last of the great scholars of Andalus was Ibn Zubayr. Now, of course, he's talking from his own time, and he's not going to include himself in the list of great ulama of Andalus because he's far too humble for that. So the last one to mention is his own teacher, right? So that's the khatam, right? Or the khitamuhu misk. I was a little bit premature, right? So, but he's just talking in terms of history. But you say it was sealed. It sounds like there's not going to be any more after this, right? Which is not a statement that I'm very sympathetic to as an idea, right? Khatimatul muhaqqiqeen. Right. So then the scholars of the Quran in the Andalus were sealed by our Sheikh, the Ustad, the great teacher, Abu Ja'far ibn Zubayr al-Gharnati. So again, like many people, he deserves a footnote. I mean, I don't know if he came up before. Ibn Zubayr from Granada. Allah give him expanse of its knowledge. So بسطة في العلم I don't know, did he say والجسم? بسطة في علمه. Okay, so but anyway, it's an expression which is a Quranic one. Gave him expansive knowledge, not an expanse of its knowledge. في علمه, I think, means his knowledge. You know, and basta is strength as well. Vast and strong knowledge. وقوة في فهمه. Okay. So وقوة, they've read as قواه. And he has an exactitude with respect to it and an acute vision. Right, so that it just needs to be improved overall. Okay. Now, Ibn Zubayr is the author of Milak al-Ta'wil. Milak al-Ta'wil is a book that I talk about in my thesis under what I call comparative methods. I can just show you that. briefly. So, page 213. So I looked through Surah Al-An'am as my case study in the thesis. So there we have got here various, in Surah Al-An'am, these are the things that Ibn Zubayr calls the near parallel verses, as I translated, the mutashabihat. So what are the differences between different occurrences in the Quran? So there's a verse in Surah Al-An'am, and then there's something which is similar to it in another part of the Quran. Why are they different from each other? How does each one fit within its local context? Right? So there's a number of examples here which I summarized what he said about them in Surah Al-An'am. So Ibn Zubayr has this very thorough treatment of this aspect of the understanding of the Quran, and you can see Ibn Juzayy actually cites him a few times in his tafsir as well. So then he talks about Ahlul Mashriq. Okay, so we'll conclude very soon, just a little bit left to say. And Ahlul Mashriq, of course, means the Islamic East as opposed to the Islamic West. So this is, the rest of the Muslim world that isn't the Maghrib.
مما بأيدينا من تواليف أهل المشرق تفسير أبي القاسم الزمخشري وأبي الفضل الغزنوي وأبي الفضل بن الخطيب. فأما الزمخشري فمسدد النظر بارع في الإعراب متقن في علم البيان إلا أنه ملأ كتابه من مذاهب المعتزلة ونصرهم وحمل آيات القرآن على طريقتهم فتكدر صفوه وتمرر حلوه فخذ منه ما صف ودع ما كدر.
Okay, so good advice in general, not and their mischief. So he mentioned these names. So again, footnotes, why does Zamakhshari get a mention and then like Al-Razi doesn't? So in case you didn't notice, Abu al-Fadl ibn al-Khatib is Al-Razi, Fakhruddin Al-Razi. If you're going to give a footnote to Zamakhshari, why not for the others? Zamakhshari is of sure and good judgment. Interesting, because then he slams him for his i'tizal. Musaddad al-Nazar, we had the expression before, right? بارع في الإعراب متقن في علم البيان. Again, perfectionist. Mutqin is not perfectionist. Perfectionism is a bit different. It's like almost like an affliction. It can be a good thing, but the point is mutqin just means that you do it perfectly, not that you're a perfectionist. That's a different question. Except that, okay, he filled his book with the Mu'tazila school and their mischief. Min madhahib al-Mu'tazila. So madhahib doesn't mean the Mu'tazila school, nor does, what it means here is their positions. وَنَصَرَهُمْ, I don't know where they got their mischief. It could be like another edition of the book has a word there. But نَصَرَهُمْ means that he advocated on their behalf. وَحَمْلَ آيَاتِ الْقُرْآنِ عَلَى طَرِيقَتِهِمْ. He made the verses of Quran accord with their path. So I disagreed with their use of hamala elsewhere, but hamala here, the way they translated it is appropriate, I would say, because he's complaining about this haml, right? He made the verses of Quran accord with their path, and so muddied its purity. So its purity meaning what? The Quran or his book, his tafsir? I think he means his tafsir. فَتَكَدَّرَ صَفْوُهُ وَتَمَرَّرَ حُلْوُهُ. So not he made, but it's صفو تكدر وحلوه تمرر. And his sweetness became bitter. Right? So take from it, you can say from him, what is pure and leave what is muddy. وأما الغزنوي.
وأما الغزنوي فكتابه مختصر جامع وفيه من التصوف نكت بديعة.
Okay, so I don't know anything about Ghaznavi, I'm afraid. Whether that's extant work or whatever. Of course, Ibn al-Khatib, Sahibuna. Ibn al-Khatib is because Imam al-Razi is Muhammad ibn Umar. His father, Umar, is he was the Khatib in their town, which was Rai. Right? Razi comes from Rai. It is a town or a city in Persia, Iran. Right? It's now pretty much in Tehran, as far as I understand. But his father was Khatib al-Rai. So he, the Imam Fakhruddin al-Razi is called Ibn Khatib al-Rai, or Ibn al-Khatib. That's why he's called Ibn al-Khatib. And then he's got this kunya here, Abu al-Fadl. Right? So Ibn al-Khatib, he's not hiding the name from it, it's just that he's sometimes quite famous by that name as well as by the name Fakhruddin al-Razi. His book contains that which is in the book of Zamakhshari.
وأما ابن الخطيب فتضمن كتابه ما في كتاب الزمخشري وزاد عليه إشباع الكلام في قواعد علم الكلام ونمقه بترتيب المسائل وتدقيق النظر في بعض المواضع وهو على الجملة كتاب كبير الجرم وربما يحتاج إلى تنخيل وتلخيص والله ينفع الجميع بخدمة كتابه ويجزيهم أفضل ثوابه.
Okay. So his comments about Tafsir al-Razi, his book contains that which is in the book of Zamakhshari. So al-Razi draws from Zamakhshari a lot, and also from al-Wahidi, and various other sources, but these are two of the sources that you can find sort of running through most of Tafsir al-Razi in various ways, in different surahs, to different extents, as I've found. And he augmented it with a copious amount. Okay, Ishba' al-Kalam, copious amount is okay, but you're kind of, he's saying that it's like he elaborated to the utmost extent. You know, Ishba' is to reach the, you know, to get full, right? To eat until you're full. Ishba' al-Kalam fi qawa'id ilm al-Kalam. On the principles of the science of theology, okay. And he composed it وَنَمَّقَهُ بِتَرْتِيبِ الْمَسَائِلِ according to the structural arrangement of the issues of jurisprudence, not of jurisprudence. And, you know, now that we have a translation of al-Razi, you're welcome. We have a translation from Masail there, which is inquiries, so we may as well use it here. نَمَّقَهُ بِتَرْتِيبِ الْمَسَائِلِ. May Allah accept our humble efforts. وَنَمَّقَهُ بِتَرْتِيبِ الْمَسَائِلِ. So he made it structured according to inquiries. And it is of a precise view تدقيق النظر في بعض المواضع. ونمقه بترتيب المسائل وبتدقيق النظر في بعض المواضع. Not, and it is of a precise view, but rather he investigated certain matters in precise detail. وهو على الجملة كتاب كبير الجرم is very of great bulk. That's a good way of putting it. Some 32 volumes. Where is Tafsir al-Razi behind me? Here, I think. Here, Tafsir al-Razi. Yeah, things look small in the distance. وَرُبَّمَا يَحْتَاجُ إلى تنخيل وتلخيص. There are actually some, there is now recently a kind of tahdhib of Tafsir al-Razi. There have been various actually in history. I don't know how good these things are in reality. I don't know how good these tahdhibs are. So I can't recommend any to you, so don't ask. May Allah benefit all by the service of the book. Ameen. Ameen. Question here which I can answer for you if you don't mind me asking, how long did the translation of volume 1 of al-Razi take? I assume you mean. Volume 1 took about 2 years. So you could say 6 months just reading it, and 6 months doing the first draft of the translation, and then a year redrafting that translation and editing it. So I would say about 2 years. And I'm talking about 2 years, sort of equivalent full-time work. Yeah. Barakallahu feekum. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.